Hello everyone and welcome back to All the Young Dudes by Miss King Bean 89. This will be chapter 11. I hope you enjoy. Chapter 11. First year. Birthdays, books, and the Beatles. Unfortunately, Madame Pomfrey was able to undo the hex with a few flicks of her wand. Still, she lectured all of them on misuse of dangerous magic. As if we wanted to look like Bigfoot, James complained as they left the hospital wing, skin tingling from the hair growth. It had to be Severus. He coated the sweets in one of his potions. I know it, Sirius seethed. Yeah, we all know it, mate, James replied. Don't worry, we'll get him back. I'm so sorry, Peter wailed, for about the 100th time. I really thought they were from my mom. It's fine, Peter. James patted his shoulder. Just wish you'd given them to us first thing on Monday. Then we would have at least bunked off Transfiguration. I demand retribution, Sirius shouted, raising his wand dramatically. Remus laughed. James did too. And you shall have it, he replied, pushing his glasses back on his nose. Patience is a virtue, Black. Vengeance like this takes time. Don't suppose you've got any other brilliant ideas, Remus? Sorry, Remus shook his head. His heart was still bounding from the terror of it. If he had seen Snape at that moment, he would have throttled him. Never mind pranking him. I'll help you, James, Peter piped up. I'll do anything. I won't be scared this time. Just as they turned the corner which led to Gryffindor Tower, when somebody behind them called out, Sirius. All four boys turned. Sirius made a small, shocked noise. It was Bellatrix Black. What do you want? He asked, looking down and scuffing his shoes on the flagstone floor. It was the most unserious posture imaginable, Remus thought. He also noticed that James stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with his friend. Come here and address me properly, the seventh-year witch snapped in response. Sirius didn't move. Bellatrix withdrew her wand. Remus was shocked, and for the first time since he'd been at Hogwarts, he'd felt frightened. Come here, she said, in a low voice, or I'll make you, and it won't be a childish little hair-growth charm, I promise. Sirius walked forward, shaking his head at James, who tried to follow. They all watched the cousins speak in quiet voices at the end of the hallway for long, uncomfortable minutes. Sirius barely looked up from the ground the whole time. Finally, she patted him on the head, then turned on her heel and left. They all exhaled, relieved. Sirius walked back to them shakily. In silence, they all entered the portrait hall and sat down in their usual sofa. All right, Sirius? James asked first. Yeah, he told. He nodded, looking paler than usual. She wanted to invite me for tea on my birthday. I think my mother must have made her. Probably held a family conference, trying to bring me back into the fold. Just because you're in a different house, and the company I'm keeping, he smirked at them. So, when's your birthday? 2 weeks, the 3rd. I'll have to go to this tea, though. Bella's not joking about knowing some really vile curses. We'll do something afterwards, then. Something good. Yeah? Peter and Remus nodded enthusiastically, but in the back of Remus's mind, he reminded that the 3rd was the night of the full moon. Sirius turned 12 and Remus wasn't there to celebrate, though he didn't think anyone minded. James was Sirius's best friend, after all, and Peter still liked to think that James belonged to him a little bit, too. So Remus would have been the odd one out, even if he hadn't been locked away in the shack trying to tear himself apart. Madame Pomfrey tried him with his sleeping draught this time, before the moon rose, but it was apparently had no effect. What was worse, he managed to give himself the biggest scar yet, right across his back. Pomfrey made him stay in the hospital wing all day afterwards, which was actually fortuitous. It meant he could just tell his friends he'd been suddenly taken ill. They were still a bit confused as to why he hadn't told them about feeling sick beforehand, but went along with it. They probably already thought he was fairly odd, and by now accepted mostly anything he told them. He wouldn't have enjoyed the birthday. James talked to Madame Hooch and arranged a lunchtime fly session for the three of them. After dinner, before Sirius had to go and change for tea with his cousins, James and Peter led the Gryffindor table in a round of happy birthday, followed by, for he's a jolly good fellow. According to the students Remus heard from afterwards, they had sung, and so say all of us, over and over, getting louder each time until Professor McGonagall had to threaten them with detention if they didn't stop. As November marched on, the days grew shorter, and the castle darker. They spent less of their time outside, and more of it huddled by the fire in the common room, playing card games and plotting revenge against Snape. The first term was drawing to a close, and the teachers seemed to be piling on more homework than ever. When Sirius and Remus were away from Peter and James, usually the other two were in the library. Sirius was reading to him. They finished a history of magic in just under 2 weeks, and then alternated between a beginner's guide to transfiguration and magical drafts and potions for the rest of the term. When the Marauders worked on their homework as a group, he even took to reading aloud, as if to himself, claiming it helped him think. This was very much to James' annoyance, who preferred silence. Though they couldn't possibly cover the entire syllabus in such a short time, to everyone's amazement, including his own, Remus's marks were improving at an astonishing rate. Sirius had apparently had the right idea. Remus's ability to retain and recall information was remarkable, and he found himself raising his hand in lessons for the first time in his life. Sirius's marks, on the other hand, had began to fall. He spent so much time trying to secretly assist Remus that he apparently no longer did any of his extra reading he prided himself in all year. As it was, his own homework became average, passable, and fell behind James for the first time. James was oblivious, of course, and really assumed that he was actually improving. But you spend so much time in the library, Remus whispered to him once, after Sirius had received an acceptable mark on his charms essay. I thought you were studying. Remus himself had still not worked up the courage to visit the library. The thought of all those books horrified him. I am studying, Sirius replied cheerily. Just not this stuff. He folded the essay anyways. I'm looking up cognitive interpretation spells. You know, so you can read by yourself. It's really tricky. Owl level, actually. But I think I've almost got it. Don't worry, Lupin. It's not as if I'm failing. This is much more interesting anyways. Remus felt horribly guilty, of course, as well as mildly ashamed that Sirius was devoting so much time to helping him. He honestly could not remember a time in his life that anyone had ever tried so hard on his behalf. It made him wish he could do something, anything in return. But other than having a difficult family, Sirius Black seemed to have want for nothing at all. In fact, there was one thing Ramus could give Sirius, which even James could not, but it was hardly worth mentioning. Something Sirius called Muggle insight. It began when Ramus finally plucked up the courage to ask about Sirius's record collection. Sirius was only too happy to share. Other than his racing broom, which was still at home, his albums were his dearest possession. Ramus could easily see why. He had introducing the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, and Help, as well as Abbey Road, Beggar's Banquet, and Sticky Fingers. Mick Jagger has to be one of the coolest Muggle I've ever seen, Sirius gushed. 2 Led Zeppelin albums. Ramus hadn't listened to them before, but the older boys at St. Edmunds were all obsessed, and Simon and Garfunkel LP hidden them at the back. Wizards, it turned out, did not generally think too much about Muggle music. All of Sirius's records had been given to him by his cousin Andromeda, who had apparently the first black sheep of the Black family, having left school a few years beforehand and married a Muggle. I hardly ever see her, Sirius explains, not since the wedding, but she posts these to me every now and then. She sends them the Muggle way so my mom doesn't find out. She doesn't understand how the post office works. So although he had an impressive collection by any 11-year-old standards, Sirius's musical passions existed almost entirely in a vacuum. He wasn't aware of any of the other Beatles songs than the ones he already had pressed into vinyl. He had never listened to the radio or watched Tops of the Pops or even opened a copy of NME before. As such, he found Ramus endlessly fascinating on the subject of music and Muggle culture. "You've actually seen them, though?" he said, awed. "You've seen them performing?" "Not in real life or anything," Ramus replied uncomfortably. "No, I know, on the telephone." Sirius nodded sagely. Ramus stifled his laughter. "On the television," he corrected. "It's more like those moving paintings you lot have, only black and white, and only Beatles, the Stones, came on once and made us turn it off because of their hair." "What about their hair?" "Too long." Ramus shrugged. "She said they looked dirty." "My hair's much longer," Sirius said, frowning. "Yeah, it is, but Muggle boys don't have long hair. Not normally." "Don't tell him that," Peter teased. "He'll shave his head." He threw a gobstone across the board on the floor. And they'd been playing a lazy game off and on for the past few days, trying to teach Ramus the rules. It rolled into one of Sirius's stones and knocked it over out of the ring, immediately squirting out a disgusting smelling liquid, which Sirius barely dodged in time. Peter grinned. "Ha, take that, Muggle lover." Sirius swore loudly and left to change his clothes. That was chapter 11. I hope you enjoy. And I'm sorry if this one's like a little later in the day. I totally forgot to record. Anyways, remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you liked the chapter. And make sure to check out the creator on AO3. Remember to drink water, have fun. Love you all.